Okay, welcome everybody. As it's now 2 o'clock, we'll get started on the Strategy and Resources Committee meeting. So, first of all, welcome, introductions and safety information, agenda item number 1. So, first of all, welcome to members of the committee, and just a reminder, the meeting is being webcast. For the benefit of those you may be watching the webcast, my name is Councillor Tony Dyer and I'm the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee. To my left, well, diagonally to my left, is Councillor Caroline, who is Vice Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee. I'll allow other members to introduce themselves as and when we come to responding to questions. However, I'll just quickly go through the emergency procedure. In the event of the alarm sounding, which we're not expecting to happen, please leave the room calmly via the lobby area and the main front door of City Hall. Turn right and then walk down the ramp towards the cathedral. The assembly point is in front of the cathedral. Moving on to agenda item 2, apologies for absence and substitutions. I believe, Ian, we have 3 substitutions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So apologies from Councillor Mack and Councillor Fodor is substituting. Apologies also from Councillor Stafford Townsend and Councillor Freeman is substituting. And apologies from Councillor Renhard and Councillor Dudd is substituting.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4, minutes of the previous meeting. I would like to move the minutes of the previous meeting of the committee, held on the 16th of September, as correct record. Can I ask for a seconder for that?
Seconded.
Thank you, Caroline. Are the rest of the committee happy to confirm the minutes as a correct record? Okay, thank you. I'll take that as a yes. Agenda item 5, Chair's announcements. I think briefly to say, just for the benefit of those attending, we have 2 meetings today. We have this meeting, and then as close as possible after that meeting, we'll have an extraordinary meeting. Originally, the previous meeting had been adjourned, but following representations from various individuals, we have decided to actually create an extraordinary meeting so that we could have a full committee of 9 members. I hope that is to everybody's satisfaction. Thank you. Agenda item number 6 is public forum. Now, we have 3 questions from Mr. Ackroyd. So, Mr. Ackroyd, your first question was regarding the corporate, sorry, bear with me, the corporate risk register. What I would say is we'll give a response to Dan, and then if Dan has any follow-up questions, he can do. But also, if any member of the committee wants to comment on this public forum, they are welcome to do so. So, Dan, I'll read through the response to your questions because I'm not very good at reading out a table.
I've read it. I suggest just, unless you want to read it for members' benefit,
I'm going to.
If it's useful.
Okay. Do you have any follow-up questions?
Said in the note I sent to you, I would put it to the committee for a discussion and whether the committee approved of the proposed changes, I said.
And as I said, if any member of the committee wishes to and do so, do I have any members of the committee? Thank you, Dan. I will forward that on to the relevant officers. So, moving on to question 2. And I think for both these questions, Dan, and I think we have been here before, whilst the matter is a legal dispute and the position remains that it is not appropriate to comment further.
still have to ask a question. My second question was not about the dispute itself, asking what is the legal basis for refusing to answer the question at this committee. The appeal against the ICO's enforcement notice is not a trial. It might be a legal matter, but there is no trial to prejudice. I respectfully request a direct response to the question for clarity.
And my response again, appeal is a legal decision remains it is not appropriate to comment further. However, you are welcome to email myself and I'll pass it on to the relevant officer for a response. Do you have a follow-up question on question 3? But I think it would be a waste of this committee's time, and I will be referring the matter to the audit committee. Thank you for your response. We'll now move on to item 7, which is the first of the substantive items. Agenda item 7 is regarding the funding for the top 4 transformation programmes. This report seeks approval of investment asks against the transformation chains budget funding earmarked for the transformation programmes as approved in the budget report 2024-2025. Specifically, an increase of one-off expenditure up to 15.7 million for the top 4 transformation programmes, which are adult social care, children in education, our families, tackling homelessness and property. This is made up of 12.9 million confirmed cost baseline as of July 2024, plus 2.8 million earmarked corporate leadership board managed contingency to take into consideration changes to the programmes, including the delivery of a further potential 3.9 million stretch target. This is a key decision as it involves spend of over 500,000 and impacts on more than 2 wards. And I would like to invite Nessa Wilson, the Transformation Portfolio Director, to introduce and outline the report.
Thank you. So as Tony explained, the approval of the investment ask against those transformation programmes. It is just a report about the funding. It does not go into the details of each of those programmes. If you need details on the programmes themselves, they'll go through their relevant committees. What it should be noted is that the proposed delegations that have been outlined in 3.21 actually reflect those approved by Cabinet back in June 23. So there's no changes. So the funding paper itself is just updated in relation to the costs, in relation to the delegations, and the purposes of that, it aligns to the original funding report back from last year. The other thing to note is the report, as I said, seeks permission to allocate those fundings. However, it is down to the individual transformation programmes and their relevant committees to actually pursue those appropriate approvals. In other words, they still need to go through key decision pathways in relation to that drawing down against that funding. If the funding's been allocated to a specific project and there's a change request of that change would still need to come back through Corporate Leadership Board to be approved. They cannot just simply use the money in a different way. The other key things to note is that majority of the funding for all 4 programmes actually relate to costs for internal resources. So some of that is actually project resources, some of that relates to actually backfilling of staff so that more senior staff members can be involved in those programmes, and some of the funding is actually being used to increase the staffing within those areas, for example, tackling homelessness. The other things really is just to say that the sort of governance of these 4 programmes are governed through both Corporate Leadership Board, and then obviously all 4 of them report to their relevant committees. We do regular baselining and the savings are tracked and then monitored through the usual MTFP process. But the other thing is that CLB can call in at any time those programmes if there's a question about the delivery of those programmes. They're probably the key things to note.
Yes. Any comments or questions? Councillor Malik?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vanessa, for information. There are some specific questions, but I now realise that that's probably going to be more committee-based, and with my finance hat, it might be better just to email you direct so we can talk about the transformation programme and the full areas. But I suppose, the question about the strategy, really, given the overall 12.9 million confirmed cost baseline, and there seems to be a significant £2.8 million contingency, what type of risks could there be that require that type of contingency fund to be, and what could trigger that to be used?
So in regards to sort of the contingency funds, in case, for example, all the time these programs are looking for further opportunities. So they're trying to find other opportunities to sort of deal with demand management, looking at new initiatives to try and find further savings. So all the time they're doing reviews and considering that. So the contingency is actually there if they put forward a robust business case to bring forward another opportunity that we could then consider that has a saving, because we obviously need to show the return of investments against the funding, and therefore that will be looked at. So the majority of that contingency is for that purpose, not exceeding. Obviously these programs have been scrutinised heavily on a regularly baseline, so we get regular reports on the use of those funds. And if I look back from 23-24, actually there was a proportion of that funding that was not used, that was carried forward. So it is heavily monitored. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful, thank you. And just something about the property transformation. How will members, and I suppose this, the list of kind of properties and how they will be sold and what criteria is going to be used? I mean, will that come back to strategy and resources, hopefully?
So that will go through the relevant committee, the more detailed report in regards to disposals and things like that.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Goots.
Yes, thanks, Vanessa. A few questions. One is page 24, figure 2. So the cost to deliver the savings table, and then the savings target per year. I noticed the property programme is actually the only one that we don't achieve the savings in 24-25. Is that because it's a multi-year investment in the property programme?
The savings relate to revenue savings. Obviously on the property programme it's slightly different, and so there, which it doesn't relate to this. So that's why the funding, for example, is much lower here on the property programme compared to the others. But obviously, as you can imagine, with any property programme and the return of those receipts and the capital, that goes for a much longer period of time.
Sorry, that's the way to what I thought. It's quite an amount, 4.4 million, and then the recurrent savings are only 1.2 million. So,
so again, the property, I mean, currently looking at those disposals, and one thing I would say is on the property programme, those savings coming through are being regularly reviewed. So the next disposal list and that, what I can do is get a more detailed report for you on that, if that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, it's just hard to understand because obviously to sign it is of the transfer save money. So if it's not saving money, it's just obviously it doesn't show that it's saving money in the papers that we've got.
So, maybe we're going to say the same thing. I think what Ness was suggesting was that the recurrence target is the revenue of property and that what isn't here is the capital element, which for property will be the bigger part.
Right.
So there is an element of capital savings that will alleviate the revenue budget, but it isn't pound for pound. So probably that 1.2 million is a significant underestimate of the ultimate savings that will be made through a smaller capital estate. Tony, is that more or less what you were going to say?
The aims of the property programme are twofold. One is to release capital receipts, and therefore there are costs in relation to that. And one is to obviously improve the efficiency and effectiveness of we manage the existing going forward. So therefore you've got a mix of two things within there. There are further savings in future years, which we believe will come into the programme as well once as Nessa says that they've been validated and pursued. But yes, it looks on face value like it would take us 4 years to pay it back, but actually the payback period is nearer 2 or 3.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my other two questions are about process. So 2, any projects within programmes with a return on investment 3 years go to the leadership board. That doesn't seem to include any elected members. So I was just wondering whether there is any scope for Strategy and Resources Committee or other committees to get involved in that. And then the same thing, Officer Recommendation 3.12, procuring a change delivery partner. It says in line with procurement routes. So again, does that include Strategy and Resources?
So in regards to the first one, I think I would need to, that would need to be a wider conversation. At the moment, that's what was agreed last year in the funding papers. So we are trying to align to what was approved last year rather than trying to make sort of big changes. In regards to the strategic partner, obviously the delegated permissions, as I outlined at the start, again follow from last year's. In regards to any involvement, this would still need to go through any strategic key decision pathway and obviously the procurement process. At the moment, we haven't called in a strategic partner. It is being held there. As we have a new chief exec coming in, there may be a requirement for a strategic delivery partner, because that will be looking at more cross-cutting programs for the organisation and what the future model, what the future sort of delivery is required. So it's just being held to one side.
And just also to follow up on that is to point out that in terms of how this is implemented, it will still be going to the relevant policy committees for what we're given is authorisation for that envelope to be reached. And in terms of property disposals, we would be creating or are in the process of creating a property working group as a subgroup of this committee was be attached to Finnish group. And then in terms of some of the properties that are going to be identified for potential disposal, that will also be coming to Strategy and Resources at some point in the work programme.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fodor, then Councillor Whippington.
Yeah, thanks very much. I was going to follow up on the same issue of the items over 3-year return. So obviously this goes back a long way. So we're well into the 2nd year of it, and it's really urgent to get the savings because savings weren't made and they've been landed on this year from last year. So why was the 3-year chosen, and shouldn't those things be going through under Invest to Save type procedures anyway? Is this going to delay it, that you're stopping everything that's going to take more than 3 years, and then it'll take longer to get the savings?
So the whole is to show return of investment, and it's standard in sort of large-scale transformation programs to look at 3 years. However, all, you know, at the end of the day, what we need to remember is there's a balance, isn't there? If you're looking at social care programs or even tackling homelessness, some of what we want to do right now to try and deal with demand, early intervention prevention, we all know takes more than 18 months, 2 years to really see those benefits start coming through. But we need to make sure it's still a wise investment against that. So anything around demand management, you know, it's very easy people to say, well, we can do certain things tactically to try and stem what's coming into the system, but real early intervention and prevention will take a good 3 years. So we have to look at that balance. We also need to balance on some of this funding. It isn't all about just looking at the pure financial savings. We also have to align it to the better outcomes, say, whether our children, for our adults, for those families. And we need to show that. So some of those improvements for the funding is actually better outcomes for those children or the sort of adults, but actually over a number of years you will also see a saving attached. So if you say, for example, part of the funding in the children's programme is increasing the number of children's homes we have in Bristol. We all know placements externally are very expensive, but actually they're not good outcomes for our children. So it is trying to do that, but we need to be monitored through financially. We also do have investment to save projects as well, but they're the two different aspects. So things like children's homes, things around like if we were looking at anything around adoption, some of the schemes around there that we see other authorities, they're going to be put forward as invest to save projects, but still come under the banner of these transformation. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that was really helpful, and it shows there's two types, because some will be primarily financially based, just others are outcome based. It's helpful, thank you.
Councillor Whippington.
Thank you. One of the things that I've never been scared to say is when I don't quite understand something, and I don't quite understand what we're being asked to approve here. Now that's probably my fault, but I'm going to make a plea here in regards to the papers for this meeting. There's 133 pages of papers on this item, and I still, at the end of it, don't quite understand what I'm being asked to approve. And as a layman on a committee, I'd really like us to try and start working these papers so that they are directed at us and what the decisions we need to make, rather than huge amounts of information coming out. So just to get to my point, we're being asked to approve an increase of one-off expenditure of 15.7 million, but I think you said that money is already in the budget. So it's not an increase in the budget, it's an increase in what? Sorry, I know that sounds thick, but I honestly, I don't quite understand what it is.
So last year, back in, we had an amount of money that was approved for transformation programs over the coming years. And that totality of the money was approved. But it was also agreed that we would have to come back year on year to draw down that money. So that totality, which was over something like 25 million, I can't remember, please don't hold me to that exact sum, was approved. But at the time, we were then asking in 23-24 a set amount of money drawn down against that. The requirement was then for us to come back in 24-25, again asking for our next drawdown from that total amount. So it shows in the budget, so it's not new, it's not we've got to find the money, but we've always been asked to come back on a yearly basis, one, to evidence and show that we've re-baselined and we're clear about the asks and what it's against. In regards to the papers, it's because obviously the equality impact assessments, because we're talking about 4 large transformation programs, we are required, rightly so, to provide those equality impact assessments. And the property programme has a number of those, which in ways we could, about making, I need to make sure they are part of those papers, so apologies. The other part of the paper was to give you some background of some examples, case studies of how we've been using the funding or how we're going to use the funding for this year, to try and show you that actually there are better outcomes. These programs is not about spending money on strategic partners, things like that. There are schemes here where we're investing in staff, so we've increased a number of social workers and OTs for both adult social care and children's social care. We're doing schemes which are better outcomes for children, for adults, tackling homelessness at the front door. So it was showing those. So apologies that you've got so many papers.
It's okay. I assume that most of these things have already been seen and signed off and approved as programs, and therefore do they need to come back, as part of this committee's papers? Because it is, 335 pages for this committee is a huge amount of paperwork when you've got to drill down into what you're actually focusing on. But what I guess what I want to know here is, you're saying that you're asking for an increase.
We're asking to draw down. So
yes.
basically,
but are you asking to draw down more than you thought you were going to be drawing down?
Actually, so last year, the whole new program, an indication of what they might require for 24-25. During 23-24, we actually didn't use all of the funding we thought we were going to use for 23-24, so some of that was carried forward. We have identified additional projects. We had new investor save schemes that were approved as part of the budget process. They then required funding. It's still within, the most important thing for you to know, it's still within that 25 million that was all approved for those programs back last year. So it's not going above and beyond. We're just making sure that we answer and show yourselves that return of investment.
Okay, but it won't have a knock-on further down the
No.
line. Okay, thank you.
Any more comments?
Sorry, Chair, I just think it's important to say that one member's expressed their views, but I think it's been really useful to have detail in these papers. So I think there's a balance to strike, but I would not discourage you from putting those types of papers and the equality impact assessments within those papers, because otherwise we'd just be asking for them again. Thank you.
And I'm not mentioning the size of the up to the audit committee. Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, first I'd just like to thank you for all the work you've done on this, and as everyone said, detail. But actually, I think probably potentially needs to be like a summary at the front, because I think what we're obviously you've got these 4 programs that have been in train a long time. What I would really like to know is how they're doing against plan. Are we behind with that? This one of the programs? Are we in front? What are the reasons we're behind? And I think that would have probably been a bit better. I know you've given us some examples, which is useful to see some of the examples in each of the programs. But I think, like globally, how each program's doing would have been useful, and just so we've got confidence there's proper rigor around all of the programs, and they are delivering, or at least on target to deliver the savings as set out.
So we do bring to strategy and results on a quarterly basis that is on those 4 programs. So the last one was in September. Your next one is in December. However, what I would say is the detailed report, so it gives you a high level, because obviously otherwise I'm writing about 5 reports for 5 different committees. The more detailed reports on each, so I bring a very high level, and I'm at the moment working with colleagues to write that for your next committee. But the more detailed reports go to the relevant Children and Young People's Committee. Apologies, I'm not going to remember all the committees' names now, so I'm not going to go to. But they get a detailed one, and they're in the public domain as well. But I'm very happy to put next time on a funding paper a summary relates to that. I did highlight that in here that there was a link to the update that I presented at September's, which gives you an outline of where they all are.
I'll just make a quick comment as well. There's 12 agenda of which the substantive agenda items are items 7 to 12, so that's essentially 6 agenda items. I have to say some of us remember attending Cabinet when there were 27 agenda items and sometimes more. So I do agree with you, we do need to look at the content of reports to make them more easy to understand, and that is something that we should always strive to do. No, I'm happy to work and find a way of doing that, but at the same time, we can sometimes fall into the trap of either we provide too much information or we provide too little information, and whichever side of the line we go, there is somebody who's going to be unhappy. Trying to find that balance between providing both yourselves as committee members, you have to make decisions, and members of the public with the information, whilst also not overloading people, is a difficult one, which hopefully we'll become better at going forward. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so for the clarity of the committee and for the benefit of any members of the public present, there are a number of recommendations in this report. I'm going to read out all the recommendations first, but we are not going to vote for them en bloc, and I'll explain why in a moment. So the recommendations in this report are that the Committee for Strategy and Resources, item 3.1, provide the following collective approval across the 4 transformation programmes: Adult Social Care, Children in Education, Tackling Homelessness and Property Programme. 2, and these are the 2 sub-approvers. 1, approved spend of up to 12.9 million for 24-25 for the 4 corporate transformation programmes, plus a further 2.8 million contingency from the resources held for the purpose of transformation, in addition to the 3.9 million aligned to strategic and digital transformation already approved. 3.1.2, which is the second part of this, is to procure and award a change delivery partner if required in the future to support the delivery of strategic transformation in line with the procurement routes and maximum budget envelopes outlined in this report. And then item 3.2 is contractor, which is to authorise the Chief Executive Officer and Director of Finance, in consultation with Executive Directors and Policy Committee Chairs, to spend the funding as outlined in this report and the appendices, and to take all steps required to procure and award a change delivery partner if required, including any subsequent extensions or variations in line with the procurement routes and maximum budget envelope of strategic transformation funding of 1.793 million as outlined in figure 1 of this report. Can I ask for a seconder for the overall motion?
Seconded.
Okay. I am now going to ask the committee to vote. In the light of comments made by Councillor Renard at the agenda briefing, we are going to ask the committee to vote for the 3 items separately. So first of all, I'm going to ask for a vote on recommendation 3.1 as outlined in your papers. Can all those in favour show their hands? Is that unanimous? Yes. Okay, thank you. Recommendation 3.1.2. Can I ask for all those in favour to raise their hands? Thank you, that's unanimous as well. And then finally, recommendation 3.2.1. Can I ask all those in favour to raise their hands? And again, that appears to be unanimous. Thank you all very much. Can I also ask the committee to note the quarterly briefing we transformation programme as outlined in Appendix 1 that went to Strategy and Resources Committee in September. Thank you, members, for your votes. Okay. Pressing the one button. We'll now move on to agenda item number 8, which is the quarterly performance report for quarter 1 for 2024-2025. This report provides an update on performance against the Bristol City Council business plan for quarter 1 2024-2025. There are no decisions to be taken on this report, which is for information. I would now like to invite Nick Smith, the Strategic Intelligence and Performance Manager, to introduce and outline the report.
I said this is the performance report against the council's business plan. And a couple of points just to highlight. What you've got is the cover report, which is looking across the 7 themes of the business plan. And then there are 3 appendices. One is the performance dashboard that has got everything in, and it's cut by theme and by committee. There's also an appendix A2, which is the performance metrics specific to the remit only of this committee. I'll explain that in a second. And the final one is the appendix A3, the 7 theme summary reports. And one thing that's different with the report now from what it was last time it came is that this time, as this is quarter 1 for this year, the reports are going to all 8 committees. So although this does include an overview of the whole council business plan, we're looking particularly at the effective development organisation theme, because that theme only reports to this committee. The other 6 committees, the rest of the council business plan performance, is reported against to the relevant committees. So in a similar way to how Vanessa was explaining for the previous item, more detailed reports on the other areas go to the different committees.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Councillor.
Yeah, for that and reminding us what our overview sort of role is. Procurement is relevant to this committee because this committee leads on it, and I was concerned that this has happened over a number of years, so I just seeking assurance it's going to be addressed. The number of breaches during the procurement process is improving, but not good. Is that being addressed? Because I say it's been going on for quite a few years. Okay.
I can just give the overview to Tony Kirkham for more detail. But the overview, as you said, is significantly behind target. But it is worth noting it's a very challenging target that was set this year, and compared to where it was last year, it's hugely improved on where it was last year. But yeah, absolutely, it still needs to go further. And if I pass to Tony Kirkham.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, we are on an improvement journey. As Nick says, we have made significant strides, and in target setting, we were very focused on being ambitious with that target in order to continue to deliver at pace. First few months, obviously, of the year, there's still been some more administrative issues in relation to time and in process, which we are following up and giving sufficient attention to. Nothing in there which is causing the council any contractual risks, but in order to ensure that we're improving our value for money position, it's important that we continue on this journey. But yes, there's been a significant amount of CRB attention and training put in place. But yes, we haven't lost focus yet.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that reassurance. I'm glad it is being addressed because it. Thanks.
Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask about BPPM 509 percentage of agreed savings delivered in year, because, and I think this is where my confusion came from the last meeting as well when we discussed these targets, because we've got down here 84% of savings delivered against a 100% target, and yet elsewhere we're told that we're delivering 71% of savings. Is this to do with the fact that we deliver more earlier in the piece and we're likely to stumble as we get further down, or what's the discrepancy between those two?
Chair, there are two elements or two ways of looking at this. In relation to the overall budget assumption in relation to in-year delivery, there's two elements, all savings themselves, but there's also the council's optimum bias, which is held. So all the figures which you're seeing as part of the monitoring reports are the in-year delivery or anticipated in-year delivery. What the performance indicator is taking into account is that the optimum bias already assumed a level of non-delivery in year. And therefore, actually, when you take that into account, the performance against the budgetary impact is higher.
Can you see why we might be a bit confused?
So the two things are reporting different things.
I guess what we really want to know is what's the one that has the impact on the budget. So are we saying this one is the one to look at in terms of what the budget won't achieve, what we won't achieve in the budget?
So this is looking at the short in relation to the budget impact. As when you see the performance reports, the in-year monitoring reports, you'll see the actual against the target within the department, but what you'll also see is the fact that when you see the gap, we are applying the optimum bias to that. So, okay. But not to each of the individual schemes. So, hopefully in future years it'll be more simple.
I think I did this figure last time, and I got a bit of a chuckle from certain people on the benches that it was unrealistic. But I knew I'd seen a figure in the 80s somewhere. Here we are.
Yeah, I think Tim, it looks like our ability to make the savings that we budgeted for is improving. So I think if you look back, obviously as chair of audit, you've seen the external auditors looking back at previous, and I think it's gone 63%, 65%, 71%, something like that. So we are on that upward curve. And I think what Tony wants us to do is much higher and much better, which we are endeavouring to do. Obviously, the more savings we actually deliver on those identified, it's less of a gap that we have to reach the following year, and also less of a gap that we have to fill with reserves or any other drawback. Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, can I just ask about the background to these papers? Because so we've business, which is kind of the yearly view of the corporate strategy. That's the right understanding, isn't it? So that takes us up to 2027. So I was just wondering, maybe as a question for you, because we've obviously got a new administration now, and this was set in the last administration. So I just wondered if there's any plans to review that document that takes us up to 2027. It's in effect, yes. It does, okay. And what's the process behind that? How are you going to take that forward?
I think there's a number of factors behind it. By its very nature, a cross-party process, but also what we're able to put into the corporate strategy needs to take account that we do have a new government, and I think all of us are hopeful that that new government will provide us with some better news than we've had previously, which might enable us to produce a corporate strategy that is not only looks good but actually delivers good as well.
Chair, could I just add something on that as well, just to say that we've already started the conversations internally about the new corporate strategy and then the inevitable business plan, but we'd also, for perspective, like to framework supports that as well, which is what dictates the reporting you'd get. And we've heard and we understand that councillors want to be really involved in developing those metrics. So we're also keen to start those conversations with you as to what they would be.
Yeah. I mean, it's useful to know because I was looking at data Environment Committee, and I think we probably need some new ones around waste performance as well, because it's very like optimistic around recycling rates and things like that, which is good. But actually, like with waste at the moment, we probably need to go back to basics a bit around sort of collection, the collections that actually take place. What we should probably measure ourselves against that as well. So I think it's the opportunity to feed into some new targets or whatever is probably welcome.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, respond, or are you okay?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Any more questions or comments from members of the committee? Okay, thank you. So the recommendations for this report, this is a report for noting. So the recommendations are that the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee notes performance against the business plan overall, including the theme summary reports and issues raised, and measures to address performance issues to be implemented by relevant services. And also that the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee notes performance against the Effective Development Organisation theme, in particular, including issues raised and measures to address performance issues to be implemented by relevant services. Can I ask that the committee notes the report as recommended? Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 9, Corporate Risk Report for Quarter 2, 2024-2025. And just to emphasise that, because I often miss this, the previous report was about Quarter 1, this is about Quarter 2. Thank you, Nick. So again, this report provides an update on current significant strategic risks to achieving the Council's objectives as set in the Corporate Strategy 2022-2027 and summarises progress in managing the risks and actions being taken as at Quarter 2, 2024-2025. Again, there are no decisions to be taken on this report. This is for information. So I'd like to invite Joachim, Senior Risk and Insurance Officer, to introduce and outline the report. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is the Q2 corporate risk report. We a particular was not there in Q1. That's, you will have noticed, something called materialized risk. And I just want to talk about that a little bit. Over the last few months, there's been question about when the probability of a particular opportunity or threat is likely, and if it happens while we're still dealing with that uncertainty, should we emphasize those kind of categories differently? So that's what we're beginning to do now. Those 3 risks we've highlighted this particular quarter, we're not removing them from the corporate. It's not an issue completely that we're dealing with it, but it has happened, but dealing with them has created more uncertainty, so there's still risk. At the same time, they have issues. So I just want to say that's also to help us to focus on the actions and the mitigations on them. But apart from that, pretty much from Q1, we still have one critical risk, which is CRR 60. We've discussed this extensively, lots of actions on the CRR 60. Some of the updates in your appendix will find out that the actions have actually progressed. If you look at the supplementary release now, some of the actions actually be completed now. So lots and lots of attention has been paid there. Every quarter, I'm always excited to see improving risks, but that tells us that colleagues are looking at the mitigations. We're testing that the mitigations are moving forward. So CRR 9, 55, we had deep dive on that. So there's a lot of attention and focus on CRR 55 and 57. It's interesting about 57 because it reflected the fact that I think Councillor Martin mentioned earlier on about the efforts going into procurement. So from a risk action, there are lots of mitigations also on that as well going on, which also complementing efforts that colleagues are doing. We've escalated one this particular quarter, just for information really, and we're being proactively looking at our insurance cover appropriateness. We are not at a crisis, but we want to make sure that we investigate and make sure that the council is well protected. So kind of highlighted as a major potential threat. It's not that just to make sure that we're also checking and getting all the process going. We have 2 that's been proposed to be managed at DDM level. Now, in our escalation process, what we're trying to avoid to have loads of risks being reported at CLB or members level. Because if you're not careful, you don't have escalation and de-escalation criteria. We could have something like 200 risks, and the reporting will be too overwhelming. So if we feel at a particular threshold, the actions are improving, we keep an eye on them. We still report it to you. If you look at some of the appendix, we mentioned them. But what we try to do is to focus on the critical ones that will require your attention. And also as you will see, the interconnectivity risks there. The good thing about interconnectivity now is that colleagues are beginning to see interdependencies within the councils. Rather than a silo approach, we understand that if something's happening in Department A, adult or in health and community and children's, we can see how it's fitting together, what Tony is doing, anybody working together. So we begin to see those relationships more effectively. And I think that's the update with the critical ones, really, except if you have any question. And the assurance bit, which look at the ranking the different DMTs, this has been very helpful. It's not, the ranking is about the level of involvement and how they're updating the action. So this is an assurance, our own internal, not external assurance, our own internal assurance about how colleagues are actually engaging with the actions, paying attention to it. And you can see there's been lots of improvement in terms of how colleagues are looking at the action, making notes where the actions are outstanding, or if we're moving dates, or if something is delayed, or if they need something to be escalated. So we've started that, we've started our ranking as well, which has been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councillor Whippington.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to mention in here, because the photo raised about the procurement breaches. Good to see that is improving, and we've had that to audit committee as well, and just to reassure Martin, it does look like that is making significant progress in terms of improvement rather than just a bit of progress. The other thing I was going to mention is there's been talk in this report about removal of the mass transit risk, which is I remember it's, if I remember it rightly, I had it open a minute ago. Sorry. CRR 43. Yeah. I think it mentions in here somewhere that perhaps that's a risk that we should remove from this report. But I wouldn't want to see that. But it may be the risk that we needs to be redefined more as if we don't provide transport solutions that will meet our need to grow, you know, that continues to be a risk to the city, because it certainly is. You know, whether we can all argue about exactly what the solution is that needs to be provided, but it's certainly a risk that we as a city are responsible for sort of keeping people moving and making sure that the city can grow without seizing up.
Yeah. Just quickly on just thank you for the comment. I think one of the things also is to ensure that the data we're sharing with you, you could see the validation in the conversations in other committees and other places. And that tells us that what we're producing, if we're saying from a risk lens, this is happening, and other colleagues are also sharing from other angle, it should begin to give assurance that our data is sort of validating or they're speaking to one another. And that's for us. On the transport, we're speaking to colleagues. And I think we're going to have a meeting to see how we can reward that and see how we can present it. Yes. Definitely still within our radar. Thank you.
I think what's not the risk was that we may miss out on some funding if we didn't get agreement to go forward. So that may be part of that. But I think you're absolutely right, Tim. Is many of us in this room and probably watching have long, painful memories of mass transit not working in different variations because it's not been delivered. So yeah, I think you're right. We should still continue to keep an eye on that. Councillor Malik.
Thank you. And thank it's that the green arrows facing upwards are much more prominent here now than in the past, especially compared to Q4 23-24. I just wanted to ask about the obvious two, so CRR 60 failure of the HRA stock, and maybe a timeline to when do you think that this is going to start shifting? Is this a long term, because it does seem to be quite a long term problem that's going to take a lot of...
I mean, yeah, you're right. Report. We were anticipating a report from the regulator. That's why we highlighted almost certain. When that came, so we had to respond to all the recommendations. The timeline, the colleagues will be able to determine, but what I know is that there are lots of efforts going to ensure it. And some of the actions there actually are outdated because of the timing of the reporting. If you look at the supplementary report now, you will have seen that some of those actions actually be completed. Some were planned to be 2025 and it's been quickly implemented earlier than planned. So if, in the supplementary report on CR 60, lots and lots of the actions and the comments of what we're doing and the progress is there. So, but I'm happy to ask the colleagues, in timing, they will be the best to give us, but I'm happy to ask them, but there's a lot of actions going on.
And the same really for CR on, you know, it's getting better, it seems, which is really positive. Will we be seeing more significant improvements in that area? Because obviously this is one of the most crucial areas for us as members, we feel.
Absolutely.
It's good to see where it is at the moment.
Thank you.
The comment, Councillor, obviously CR60, the failure of HRA stock to meet landlord statutory obligations, that was brought on about by the introduction of new regulations that we had to be compliant with, and therefore until we are compliant with all of those regulations, it continues to be a critical risk. I think I had Councillor Fodor. No, Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, I was just looking at CRR 55, placed in unregistered provision may be at risk. So I can see that that's kind of going in the right direction. But in terms of it being likely to happen, it's still at the highest level. And it's not really an area that I'm not on that particular committee, but that does seem a little bit concerning. And I just wondered, is there a robust plan in place around that? And also, are there kind of legalities there in terms of thresholds that we're not meeting in regards to that?
Absolutely. That particular, the colleagues working with them has been highlighted as highs because it's just for being conservative or being cautious. Anything that has to do with children, we know, even no matter how careful we've been, if something happens, it's going to hit the media. So colleagues are doing a lot to it. But we want to keep that so that everybody's aware that this is a very, very, we need to treat with care. So the mitigations are going on, but because it has to do with vulnerable young people, so they maintain that. So I've argued with them, said it's going to be possible to remove it. They want to keep an eye on it, keep looking at that particular threat. Not because they're not doing anything. So not because something has happened. It's just to make sure that it's priority and it's at the heart of everybody. That's why. Sorry.
Can I just very quickly add, as somebody that is on the Children and Young People's Committee, we are hot on monitoring, and we've asked for more data to come forward, and Hannah's now preparing reports each time, which I don't think has been done before on certain areas that we are particularly interested and focused on. That's been really helpful, and it gives us quite a lot of reassurance and assurance as well, particularly as a sort of new, for us new members, that things are being looked at quite carefully. So just to kind of emphasise what you've said, that we are very conscious of the importance of looking after our children and our vulnerable children in the city.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to hear that feedback from them, and this is not lawful practice. So in that sense, it's absolutely right for it to be on the risk register, and it's not unique to Bristol at all. This is unfortunately, and it shouldn't happen, but it does happen in other local authorities as well. I know for sure that the senior officers regularly alert Ofsted to the fact that this is happening. So Ofsted are aware, not just in Bristol, but more systemically, that this is practice that is both, it's not what we should be doing, but we only do it when we have no option or alternative. And my understanding is that the new government is looking at a sort of a number of issues relating to the provision of children's placements with a view to expanding and developing that market, which is so constrained at the moment. So I know that's something that certainly does occupy the minds of senior officials in the Department for Education. So, in summary, I think this is a system problem nationally. It's being closely monitored by both the department and the committee in the way that's described. It's being kept under control and is being done with the awareness and knowledge of the regulator.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Whittington, I'm presuming you're going to say about audit.
I was just going to reassure Kai that this has also been to audit committee, and we've had quite a significant audit, so there are a lot on this at the moment, and making sure that we do everything that we can, given the restrictions in terms of where you can place children. But it's certainly getting a lot of scrutiny at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, in that instance, can I therefore ask that the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee note the report? Can I take that as noted? Thank you. We'll then move on to agenda item number 10, which is the leasehold residential property insurance for 25-26. This report seeks approval for the procurement of a minimum one-year insurance arrangement starting from the 1st of April 2025 for the Council's leasehold and right to buy scheme. This is a key decision as it involves spend of over 500,000. I also need to advise the committee that a correction is required to recommendation 1 of the report. The reference to a cabinet member for finance, governance, property and culture should of course read Chair of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. I'd like now to invite, Tony. Sorry.
Chair, I think you got me for the next 3. Very briefly, hopefully ministry report in relation to the procurement strategy for this essential piece of insurance which we are required to provide, charged through the HRA rather than the general fund, and then in part charged where we can onto the individual leaseholders. But as you can see from the report, a difficult market, very few providers in this space, and therefore the strategy which we're proposing. Chair, happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Goots.
Yeah, so this is just because I don't understand how the system works. So this is for buildings insurance, okay? Why do we have to do buildings insurance for right to buy? Sure, because if they're owned, it's the communal.
It's because it's blocks of flats, so not
blocks
all
of flats. Okay. Do we actually charge owners for that? Okay, great, thank you.
Councillor Gillandris.
Just to say, I don't think we've got much choice but to agree. Insurance companies are getting quite picky. They are moving out of certain markets. So this isn't just picking on Bristol, unfortunately, just something that is happening. So I think, sadly, we have little choice.
Councillor Malik.
So it seems that there was a charge of 511,000 in 23-24. 24-25 predicted 591 quote, and then in the future 656. I mean, that's a huge increase, for the coming years. In terms of competition and rebrokerage, have we we must have exhausted all options.
Chair, as said in the report, it's a difficult market. Not all of that growth in price is a product of price inflation. Some of it is in relation to growth in property value and number of properties covered. But yes, it is an overall concerning piece. We do charge onto the individuals as best we can, but not all of our costs can be covered in that way.
Councillor.
Thanks. Can I just ask about the consultation with Leaseholder? Has that taken place already, or is it pending an acceptable contract being sorted out? And they're quite difficult people to engage with en masse, and a number of them, from my experience as representing people in some of these blocks, is that a lot of them do tend to challenge if they get a letter from the council with an increased bill. So I just wondered what the background is around the consultation.
I believe there is a chair, but I couldn't give.
Any more comments? Okay, in that instance, there are two recommendations. So recommendation 1 is that the strategy and resources policy authorise the Director of Finance, in consultation with the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, to take all steps required to procure and award a 1+1 year contract insurance arrangement for leaseholders and the right to buy scheme as outlined in the report. And the second option is to authorise the Director of Finance to invoke any subsequent extensions, variations specifically defined in the contract or contracts being awarded as outlined in this report. I move the report recommendations. Can I ask for a seconder?
Seconded.
Can I ask the committee vote to indicate willing to vote in favour of the recommendations? Can you please show your hands? Thank you. I believe that's unanimous. Oops. We now move on to agenda item 11, the Finance Outturn report. This report presents information and analysis to the committee on the council's financial performance against the approved budget and its forecast use of resources for the financial year 2024-2025. The report also informs the committee on the delivery of planned savings in this financial year of 2024-2025. Most of the recommendations in this report are from noting, but there is one key decision as set out in relation to the revised capital budget, and I believe there is a proposed amendment to that change, which we'll discuss when we get to that point. In the meantime, I invite Tony Kirkham, the Director of Finance, to introduce and outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the next in a series of which we've considered here at SNR throughout the current financial year. Just to pick out some of the headlines, from the general fund point of view, we still see overheating in relation to demand in services, children's services, temporary accommodation, asylum seekers, transport, adult services, all which we've spoken about before, and are considered in more depth in relation to the policy committees. But obviously from an S&R point of view here, we have the overall umbrella view of this position. So P5 saw a slight improvement in relation to the general fund. We are hopeful that that is a positive direction of travel, and as the Chair says, we have seen some increases in savings delivery elements, but we also have seen some cost control elements now start to work their way through. There are a number of activities which management team have brought forward which are still relatively early days in relation to spend control, procurement control, workforce review and debt recovery initiatives. We are hopeful that we will see the impact of those activities, that advice and that support given to budget holders will improve in future months. But it is still obviously a significant projected overspend within year. We also have a number of underlying risks which we are looking to manage in that space, which again we are looking for further improvement in as we move through the management cycle. In relation to the housing revenue account, we continue to see a worsening position in relation to the current financial year. There are a number of issues which we have highlighted both here and again will form the conversation of the relevant policy committees moving forward. But that has in part been a product of the regulatory issues which we're experiencing and the action plans which we're putting in place to mitigate those, which we touched on in the earlier risk report. Dedicated schools grant, it is also a worsening position. There are a number of cost drivers in this space which are driving up costs. We are in conversation, regular monitoring and discussion with the DFE in relation to the plans in relation to the safety valve in this area, and I'm pleased to say that although obviously the DFE are continuing to monitor us, that they are moving forward with the agreement as per se. Our next review with them will be in November. The other areas, the ring-fenced accounts, are within their various different budgets, but the capital programme, we are recommending that there is a rebasing of the capital programme, in part to take into account in-year activity, but also to take into account the priority in relation to the regulatory issues. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and it looks like I'll be answering any questions.
Looks like you've been deserted, Tony. Any comments for Tony? No, it looks like you're getting off scot-free. Astonishing. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there is a proposed amendment to the approver, which is there's one approver to go forward. So if everybody is okay with me, first of all, going through the list of items to note, Councillor Goots.
Can I just ask what environment?
So environment is where you move a budget from one place to another in very simple terms, but so the net position is nil.
Okay, thank you. If I can ask that the following items, bear with me, there are 14 of them. 1. The Council's General Fund forecast Outturn revenue overspend of 19.7 million at period 5, quarter 2 for 2024-2025 against the Council approved budget of 533.7 million. 2. In-year measures to reduce this financial pressure. 3. The quarter 2 technical environments as shown in Appendix A1A, Section 3, Tables 3A to 3D. 4. The performance on delivery of savings as shown in Appendix A1A, Section 4, Tables 4A and 4B. 5. The additional rated net risk of 7.8 million per the Risk and Opportunities Register, as shown in Appendix A1A, Section 5, Tables 5A and 5B. 6. The Council's Outturn position of 14.8 million overspend within the housing revenue account to be transferred to the HRA General Reserve at the year end. That's Appendix A1A, Section 6.4. 7. The Council's Outturn position of a 31.7 million overspend, which is a net of 15.0 million in the dedicated SCURS grant, and that this brings the carry forward deficit to 90.3 million. Following the application of the DFE's 24-25 safety valve, combined with contribution from the general fund, a total of 52.2 million is forecast to be carried forward at the year end in the DSG deficit reserve. That's Appendix A1A, Section 6.5. 8. The break-even position on public health services. That's Appendix A1A, Section 6.6. 9. The break-even position on the Bristol Harbour Fund. Appendix A1A, Section 6.7. 10. The current planned flexible use of 12.0 million capital receipts. That's Appendix A1B, Section 3. 11. The current levels of outstanding debt. That's Appendix A1A, Section 7.9. 12. The current balance sheet WIS. That's Appendix A1B, Section 8. 13. The Council's forecast underspend of 70.7 million against the capital programme revised budget of 2024-25 comprised of 42.7 million underspend on the general fund and 28.0 million underspend on the HOA. That's covered in Appendix A1B, Section 1, and notes that there will be further capital programme deep dive reviews in September. Appendix A1B, Section 1.9. 14. The Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration's decision to return unspent capital grant allocation of 0.895 million to Homes England, and that this has no consequent budget impact, either capital or revenue. Can I ask the committee to note those items? Thank you. Okay. There is an approval. I'll read out the original recommendation and then I'll ask for the amendment to be presented. So the original recommendation is that the committee approves revisions to the revised capital budget to incorporate the reprofiling of 62.3 million budget into future years, following both the total 70.7 million forecast underspend at Q2 period 5. But I believe that there is a proposed amendment.
Sorry, Chair, I think initially you need to move and second the original.
My mistake. Sorry, Tim. I'd like to report recommendation for approval, and can I ask for a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Do we have an amendment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is just a recognition that the Baltic Wharf and Hengrove developments are currently subject to an escalation panel, and therefore we think that part of the revisions to the capital budget need to be delayed until such time as that escalation panel has taken place and a final decision has been made. So that's really all this is about, but I don't think it's controversial.
No, I don't think it is either. Do you have a seconder or second it?
Seconded.
Thank you. Can I ask for all those in favour to raise their hands? That's congratulations, Tim. Can I therefore ask, so we'll propose the motion as amended. Can I ask all those in favour to show their hands? Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 12, which is the medium-term financial capital strategy. This report presents the medium-term financial strategy and capital strategy. There are fundamental parts of these are fundamental parts of the Council's financial planning process, and together they set out the Council's strategic approach to the management of its finances and provide a framework for delivery of the Council's priorities. The medium-term financial strategy and capital strategy are rolling documents covering the periods 2025-2026 to 2029-2030 and 2025-2026 to 2034-35 respectively. And in line with good practice, both are regularly refreshed so that their assumptions remain relevant, up to date and accurate. And I would like to invite Tony Curtin, Director for Finance, to introduce and outline the report again.
Thank you, Chair. So as the Chair says, this is the latest refresh, Council's position. We've rolled it forward a year from the one which you saw and agreed back in March. The overall position in relation to the general fund shows a projected gap of around 52 million in year one, and that grows to around 67 million over the period based on the various different sets of assumptions which we've undertaken over that period. Obviously, these are assumptions based on the best available information. This is a particularly volatile year in relation to the fact that we do have a new government coming in place. We are anticipating there may be changes in relation to policy. We may see some indication of that come the Chancellor's speech at the end of the month. But it is likely that the information which we gain and will need to review will transpire over the next few months with the local government finance provisional settlement normally anticipated before Christmas, with the final settlement not until the new financial year. So it is a range of assumptions. It's the best assumptions which we have at this point in time in relation to the Council's anticipated income, and what it takes into account is an in-depth review of the pressures within the system. So we have spent a lot of time working with the departments to identify what we see as the full year cost next year of the current policy which the Council has. And those policies include the savings programmes which you've approved to date. So there are a number of moving points, but this is your starting point in relation to the size and scale of the financial challenge the Council has. As I say, it takes into account anticipated price increases and demand increases, which are actually very volatile at this moment in time on a number of service levels. So we do have to be mindful that it is the best information available to us at this moment in time, but we have undertaken a rigorous process. We have walked through the various different assumptions and policy changes and reviews with the finance subcommittee. The Chair may want to comment on the value of that work, but that has given us what I see as a relatively sound base and understanding of our position, and therefore gives us a focus for the management action and review that's required to identify cost reductions, savings, increased income from these assumptions, which will subsequently give the Council the opportunity to prove a balanced budget come February-March next year. We've also reviewed the capital programme based on a set of assumptions, and obviously that too is there for you to see. So, Chair, hopefully I've described where we're at and how we've got here. I'm more than happy to answer any questions in relation to that journey.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I'll just quickly add before we go to the rest of the committee is some of the numbers that you would have seen in this report are very scary. However, what I will say is that all through, we don't expect the end of October budget to be providing us with magic money trees. At the same time, I do think there are indications that there will be some good news in the October the 30th budget. For us, it's probably more looking towards the local government financial settlement, which will give us further information. And I think looking beyond that for the medium-term financial strategy is the comprehensive spending review. And and the indications are that there may be the opportunity for us and other councillors to input into that in more detail. On that note, Councillor Martin Fodor, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you for the account of the document strategy, which is what I wanted to look at. So, and obviously we do, I'm sure everyone here wants to see a better settlement for the local authority. But looking at how we've used the money that has been available, there's an inconsistency I'm concerned about. And I'm referring to the Invest to Save item on page 382 to 3, which shows a falling commitment to Invest to Save over 3 years. And I do know, having been in the finance working group on previous years, we've very much emphasised the importance of Invest to Save and the need to grow it, to save all the authority, the whole authority and all the services money. And then there's the inconsistency is that has dropped. At the same time, Invest to Maintain and Improve has dropped quite dramatically last year. I can see there's an impact from funding that has been won from places like Weka. So that has taken a bigger proportion. But if you go forward to page 396, it suggests that Invest to Save was not 2%, but 4%, rising to 6%. So which is it? Has it dropped to 2% or is it rising to 6%? It's the prioritisation of capital investment.
Put the mic back on. So the previous strategy included 4% and we're anticipating a growth to 6%. It's fair to say that these are aspirations in relation to the overall position. Because at this stage, we haven't identified all the solutions to the 52 million which we talked about. It's difficult at this stage to anticipate what the makeup of the Invest to Save will be as we advance those schemes. Because obviously by their nature of the Invest to Save, they come into the capital programme based on a business case rather than being, requiring financing. They are self-financing by nature over that period. So in this space, other than that, we do have some treasury management elements which we need to look to, and some guidance in relation to the overall level of debt that the council's willing to accede to. There still is capacity as part of this next phase to encourage, and where we have sound business cases, to further invest it and Invest to Save type schemes, but also to look at where they are with partners, with Weka, etc., where there are opportunities to collectively undertake investment. Then we are working with officers to identify those, and obviously where we think they are robust, they will form part of the budget process moving forward.
Can I just follow that up? So the aspiration 4%, which was really disappointing because we kept saying this should be prioritised and it was being dropped. Now the aspiration is to raise it beyond 4% to 6%. But where there are things with a sound business case, I'd like to seek the commitment that they will go forward. So we have at least one in the Environment and Sustainability Committee. We can save the authority money by investing to save energy. We need to have a fund to do that. It will make money back. It will save the authority money. But it's being delayed by this review. And if something has a sound business case, when will we know that it can go forward?
I'm concerned to hear that we've been
yeah.
On the basis that if there is an Invest to Save business case, then in my view they stand alone. The one thing I would say as part of this process, organisations traditionally wait for the whole package of budget measures to be approved at one time. Now, there are some elements of that, but where we've got investor saves, they shouldn't be on the same clock. So they should be moving forward into full business case if we think there is sound evidence at outline business case.
That's great. I'm elsewhere because I think we have that, and thanks. Because the sooner it starts, the sooner it saves the council money.
And happy to take that one offline, Councillor.
Councillor Whippington.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Tony mentioned about the finance subcommittee, and I was just wondering whether that committee, presumably that committee is now meeting, whether that committee is going to be reporting back to us at various points. I appreciate sometimes there'll be confidential stuff, but it would be useful to know how often it's meeting, what it's discussing, that kind of thing. And for that, maybe to come back to this committee on a regular basis, because it's a bit of a shadowy operation at the moment, to be honest.
Councillor Malik.
I'll take offence to that. I'm chair of the Finance Committee. We're meeting regularly. I think it is a private session, so the information that we hold is held between us. Effort. You will have your representation on there as well. I think they're doing quite a good job in understanding the medium-term financial strategy plan and helping progress it in a timely manner. But obviously, maybe group representatives should be feeding back the work, but there are limitations as to some of the stuff is quite restricted. Tony, would you?
Chair, so the issues that are in this report and all of the various different policy reviews have been through the Finance Subcommittee. So although this is my report, it's authored by me, it is very much based on the work which we've done with the Finance Subcommittee. So they have been given the check-in challenge, obviously in private, to this process. Obviously, it's the first year of the committee system for Bristol, so there's a bit of learning in relation to how the various different elements would work. But Finance Subcommittee has been well attended. It has put in its hours, if you don't mind me saying, Chair, in order to help us do the check-in challenge in relation to these figures. So therefore, they are a sound basis on the basis of the work which we've done with them.
No, I'm absolutely sure it's doing good work. I just remember from my time on scrutiny subcommittee that we couldn't talk about most of the things that were discussed there with other members of our group. So I just thought it might be useful to report back, just to say we've met 6 times, discussed the budget, and what the process is, because it is a new process, and I don't know how that committee is actually going to feed into the budget process, or whether other people can feed into that committee. It's a bit of an unknown, isn't it? So it'd be useful to know how it's working.
I think what we'll do is there are terms for the Finance Subcommittee. What I'll do is Councillor Malik and Tony, and we'll work out the opportunity to provide some information and update back to this committee. In the end, the Finance Subcommittee will make recommendations that will come to the Strategy and Resources Committee, because the Strategy and Resources Committee in turn needs to be able to recommend that budget to full council. Any more comments or questions? Councillor Malik.
I think, Tony, one of the things that we were discussing at the kind of finance recently was that there's a on inflation and interest rates that are factored in. It might be worth the committee to know, how they can impact the strategy going forward, because obviously that needs to be noted. I can't seem to find them in the papers.
So obviously one of the drivers behind the analysis in here in relation to what we anticipate the council spend going forward, one of the key drivers there is inflation in relation to cost prices which we pay award, and also on the other side looking at what we see the RPI position, CPI position being, and therefore what we would assume in relation to the charging position. So But whereas the model which you previously had made some high-level assumptions in relation to inflation, we've driven it much further down into the detail of each department and in each particular material contract. So that the finance subcommittee has seen work in that space, which is basically looked at the different cost drivers for each of those services, and therefore we feel we have a much rounded, better position, more accurate position in relation to the assumptions for inflation next year. So it is much more granular as part of this process, whereas in previous processes the council almost held a corporate contingency for inflation, whereas what we're driving it down, in particularly where we see there are material issues, we're driving that down into the service assumptions.
Any more comments or questions? Okay. In that case, this report is for noting. So can I ask that the committee notes, 1, the outlook and projections within the 5-year medium-term financial strategy and capital strategy, including appendices A1 and A2. 2, the updated reserve policy, appendix A3, and 3, the medium-term financial strategy principles, appendix A4. Can I ask committee to note those? Thank you. That brings us to the end of this Strategy and Resource Policy Committee ordinary meeting. Just to remind everyone, we do have an extraordinary meeting at 4 p.m. We can't start it earlier than that because obviously we have notified members of the public that's when we'll be starting the meeting, and it'd be unfair on them if we started it and they came in half hour afterwards and wonder what the heck we were doing. So enjoy a 30-minute break, go away, work hard, come back at 4 p.m.